Welcome back to Vietnamese Vixens. Today's story hits different because it comes from a place most of us hope we never find ourselves 75 years old, alone in a foreign country, watching the life you built over 4 decades disappear into the humidity and neon of Southeast Asia. This is Lars, from Gothenburg, Sweden, widower, retired civil engineer. A man who thought he was escaping loneliness and cold Swedish winters, who thought he'd finally cracked the code on affordable, meaningful retirement. Instead, he cracked open his savings account and poured everything he had into a fantasy that was never real. He thought he'd found a second chance at love, at purpose, at feeling like a man again. What he found was a masterclass in self-deception. If you've ever ignored warning signs because admitting the truth felt worse than living a lie, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. And if this story resonates, hit that like button and subscribe because Lars's confession is one we all need to hear. Now, here's his story in his own words. My name is Lars Eriksson. I'm 75 years old and I'm writing this from a studio apartment in District 7, Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. I never thought I'd be here. Not like this anyway. 2 years ago, if you told me I'd blow through most of my retirement savings chasing a woman 4 decades younger than me, I would have laughed in your face. I was a rational man, an engineer. I built bridges for God's sake. I understood load-bearing calculations, stress points, structural integrity. Turns out I didn't understand a damn thing about my own vulnerabilities. Let me back up. October 2022. That's when I landed at Tan Son Nhat Airport, stepped into that wall of heat and humidity that hits you the second you leave the terminal. It was like walking into a wet towel wrapped around your face, but I loved it immediately. After 43 years of Swedish winters, after gray skies and early darkness, and the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes you feel like you're already dead, this heat felt like life. It felt like proof I was still breathing. My wife Ingrid died in March 2021. Cancer. We'd been married 46 years. The flat in Gothenburg felt like a tomb after she was gone. Every room full of her absence. Every silence screaming that I was alone now. That this was it. This was how I'd spend whatever years I had left. Eating microwaved meals, watching Swedish television, waiting for my kids to remember I existed long enough to send a text message. My daughter Emma lives in Stockholm with her family. My son Anton moved to Berlin years ago. They called after Ingrid died, visited for the funeral, stayed a few days. Then life moved on. Their lives, anyway. Mine just stopped. I started researching retirement abroad. You hear stories, right? Expats living like kings in Thailand, Mexico, Portugal. I didn't want Thailand too many stories about bar girls and scams. Portugal felt too European, too similar to what I was trying to escape. Vietnam kept appearing in my searches. Low cost of living, warm weather year-round, fascinating culture. And the numbers made sense. My pension was 18,000 kronor a month, about 2,000 US dollars. In Sweden, that barely covered my expenses even after selling the flat. In Vietnam, according to every blog and forum I read, I could live comfortably, even well. I did the math obsessively. At the time, the exchange rate was roughly 1 Swedish krona to 2,300 Vietnamese dong. My monthly pension translated to over 41 million dong rent. For a decent apartment in a good expat area like District 7, maybe 12 million dong. Food, utilities, entertainment. Another 10 to 15 million, I'd have money left over. Actual savings each month. For the first time since retiring, I wouldn't be calculating every purchase, wouldn't be stressed about my dwindling savings account. And I had those savings. I'd sold the Gothenburg flat for 400,000 kronor after Ingrid died. Not a fortune, but enough. A cushion. Emergency money. Maybe a new car someday. Or helping Emma with the grandkids' education. I kept it in my Swedish bank account, separate from my pension, just sitting there making almost nothing in interest but giving me peace of mind. So I bought a one-way ticket. Packed 2 suitcases. Threw away or donated most of what Ingrid and I had accumulated. Our kids didn't want much. A few photos, some of their mother's jewelry, my old watch collection. The rest went to charity shops. I felt lighter with every item I discarded. Like I was shedding an old skin. The first weeks in Ho Chi Minh City were overwhelming in the best way. The noise, the traffic, the smell of street food everywhere, the way motorbikes swarmed around cars like schools of fish. I rented a serviced apartment in District 7 through an agency that specialized in expat housing. 12 million dong a month, just like I'd budgeted. Furnished, clean, air conditioning that worked most of the time, security guard downstairs who nodded at me every morning. I fell into a routine quickly. Coffee at the same cafe every morning, a little place called Cafe Hung near Crescent Mall, run by a family, always busy with locals. I'd sit at the same table by the window, order a cà soin, try to read my Vietnamese language app, watch the city wake up. The coffee was strong and sweet, nothing like the weak filter coffee back home. Everything tasted more intense here. The mangoes, the banh mi, even the beer. It felt like I'd been living in black and white for years, and suddenly someone turned on the color. I joined an expat Facebook group, went to a few meetups. Most of the guys were younger 50s, early 60s, still working remotely or running online businesses. A few retirees like me, but they traveled in packs, compared stories about their home countries, complained about the heat and the traffic, and how things were better back wherever they came from. I didn't want to be that kind of expat, the bitter one, the one who moved abroad but never really left home. Still, the loneliness crept in. That's the thing nobody tells you about. Retirement abroad, you can be surrounded by millions of people and still feel completely invisible. The language barrier meant most interactions were transactional. I could order food, pay for things, say basic greetings, but I couldn't have a real conversation, couldn't make a joke and have someone laugh, couldn't share a memory or a thought and have it land with meaning. 3 months in, I was starting to wonder if I'd made a mistake. The money was working exactly as planned. I was spending less than my pension, actually saving a little each month. But I was lonely in a way that made my life in Gothenburg feel almost social by comparison. At least there I knew the language. At least I could call Emma and she'd answer sometimes. That's when I noticed Lynn. She worked at Cafe Shung. I'd seen her before. Of course, she was hard to miss, even in a city full of beautiful young women. But I'd never really looked. I was 73 years old, for Christ's sake. What was I going to do? Stare at girls young enough to be my granddaughter like some pathetic old creep? But one morning in January, the cafe was quiet. Just me and an older Vietnamese man reading a newspaper, and Lynn brought my coffee and sat down. Not in a forward way. She just asked if the seat was taken, gestured to the empty chair across from me. Her English was decent, better than my Vietnamese. She asked where I was from, how long I'd been in Vietnam, if I liked it here. Normal questions. But the way she asked felt different. Genuine, like she actually cared about the answers. She was 35, she told me later, looked younger. She had that particular kind of beauty that Vietnamese women seem to have, delicate features, long dark hair she kept tied back for work, skin that looked like it had never seen a Swedish winter. She'd grown up in the Mekong Delta, came to Ho Chi Minh City 7 years ago looking for work. Her mother still lived in the village, getting older, needing help. Lynn sent money home every month. We started talking regularly. She'd take her break when I came in, sit with me for 10 or 15 minutes. She asked about Sweden, about snow she'd never seen. Snow, could barely imagine it. I showed her photos on my phone. Pictures of Ingrid and me from years ago, standing in front of our flat with everything covered in white. Pictures of Emma's kids, my grandchildren I barely knew. Lynn looked at everything carefully, asked questions, seemed genuinely interested in this old man's life. She told me about her ex-husband. They'd married young, he'd been controlling, sometimes violent. She got out, but it cost her family had been ashamed. She'd had to start over with nothing. Working at the cafe paid enough for a small room she shared with another girl, enough to send money to her mother, not much else. She wasn't complaining, she said. Just explaining. I appreciated that, the honesty. I started coming to the cafe twice a day, morning coffee, afternoon coffee. If Lynn wasn't working, I felt disappointed in a way that embarrassed me. I was a 73-year-old man getting butterflies over whether a 35-year-old woman would be at a coffee shop. It was ridiculous. But it was also the first time I'd felt anything other than numb since Ingrid died. One afternoon in early February, Lynn asked if I wanted to go for a walk after her shift. Just around the neighborhood, she said. Show me some places tourists didn't know about. I said yes before my brain could talk me out of it. We walked along the Saigon River just before sunset, the sky turning orange and pink, the heat finally breaking into something almost comfortable. She showed me a small temple tucked between buildings, a street vendor who made the best beinexio in District 7, a park where old men played Chinese chess under the trees. We talked about everything and nothing, her dreams of someday having her own cafe, my memories of building the T-Yorn Bridge back in the 80s, how strange it felt to be starting over at our respective ages. At one point, walking past a row of tamarind trees, her hand slipped into mine. Just like that, natural. Easy. Like it belonged there. I almost pulled away the absurdity of it, the age difference, what people would think. But her hand was warm and small and real, and I was so goddamn tired of being alone. We stopped at a bench overlooking the river, watched the boats drift past, the lights starting to flicker on across the water. She leaned her head against my shoulder. Didn't say anything, didn't have to. I felt something I hadn't felt in years, useful, wanted. Like maybe there was a reason I'd sold everything and flown 8,000 kilometers to this chaotic, beautiful, incomprehensible city. Like maybe this was why I came here. Like maybe, against every rational thought in my engineer's brain, this was my second chance. I should have known better. I should have seen it coming. But when you're 73 and lonely, and someone makes you feel like you matter again, you don't ask too many questions. You just hold on and hope it's real. The first request came 2 weeks after that walk along the river. Small, almost reasonable. Lynn's motorbike wouldn't start. She needed it for work, for getting around the city. The repair shop quoted 3 million dong. She apologized for even mentioning it, said she'd figure something out, maybe borrow from her roommate. But I could see the stress in her face. The way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes that morning at the cafe. 3 million dong. I did the conversion in my head, about 1,300 kronor, maybe $130, nothing. Less than I'd spent on a decent dinner back in Gothenburg. I transferred the money that afternoon through my banking app. She cried when I told her. Actual tears. Hugged me right there in the cafe. Said I was saving her life, that she didn't know what she'd do without me. The other customers stared, but I didn't care. I felt like a man who could solve problems. Like I mattered. The motorbike was fixed 2 days later. She took me for a ride through District 7, weaving through traffic, her body pressed against my back as I held onto her waist. I hadn't been on a motorbike since I was in my 20s. The danger of it, the speed, the way we slipped between cars and buses like water finding cracks. It made me feel alive in a way I'd forgotten was possible. She started spending more time at my apartment after that. Cooking dinner sometimes, simple Vietnamese food, rice and fish and vegetables she'd buy at the market. She'd show up with plastic bags full of ingredients, take over my tiny kitchen, fill the place with smells that made the apartment feel less like a hotel room and more like a home. She never asked to stay over, just stayed, naturally. Like we'd been doing this for years. I didn't question it. Why would I? I was happier than I'd been since Ingrid got sick, maybe happier than I'd been in the last decade of my marriage, if I'm being completely honest. Ingrid and I had loved each other, but it was comfortable love by the end. Routine, predictable, safe. This thing with Lynn felt dangerous and new and intoxicating. I knew it was temporary, of course I knew, but I wanted to live inside it as long as possible before reality showed up. The second request came in March. Her mother was sick, needed medicine, the public hospital didn't provide. 5 million dong for the prescription, the doctor's fee, the tests. Lynn showed me photos of her mother, a tiny woman with white hair and the same delicate features as her daughter, lying in a hospital bed that looked older than I was. She showed me the medical documents, all in Vietnamese, covered in stamps and signatures I couldn't read. 5 million dong, about 2,200 kronor. I transferred it without hesitation. Her mother got better. Lynn was grateful, affectionate, attentive. Cooked for me every night that week. We'd eat together, watch Vietnamese TV that I didn't understand, but she'd translate the funny parts, laugh together on my sagging couch. She started keeping clothes at my place. A toothbrush appeared in the bathroom. Small things that made it feel like she was moving in without anyone saying the words out loud. I knew what this looked like from the outside. I wasn't stupid. 73-year-old foreign man, 35-year-old local woman, money changing hands. I'd heard the stories in the expat groups, the warnings about bar girls, scammers, women who targeted lonely old men with pensions. But Lynn wasn't like that. She worked at a cafe, not a bar. She had a family, a history, a real life. She didn't ask for money. Situations arose, emergencies happened, and I helped because that's what you do for someone you care about. And I was starting to care about her, more than I should have, more than was smart. When Emma called from Stockholm rare enough that I knew something was wrong, I found myself lying about how I was spending my time. Told her I'd joined a hiking group, was learning Vietnamese, keeping busy with expat activities. Didn't mention Lynn. Couldn't explain something I didn't fully understand myself. April brought the first big request. Lynn's younger brother was getting married in the Mekong Delta. The family expected her to contribute to the wedding. It was tradition, she explained, face and honor, And all these cultural concepts I didn't fully grasp but tried to respect. 15 million dong, 6,500 kronor, almost half a month's pension. I hesitated. For the first time, I actually paused before saying yes. Lynn saw it. Her face changed. The light went out of her eyes. She apologized immediately, said she shouldn't have asked, that it was too much, that she'd figure something else out. Started gathering her things from my apartment, the extra clothes, the toothbrush, the little bottle of coconut oil she used on her hair. I panicked. The thought of her leaving, of going back to my quiet apartment, with no one cooking in the kitchen, no one laughing at the TV, no one making me feel like I was more than just an old man waiting to die. I couldn't handle it. I transferred the money that night, told her family was important, that I understood, that of course I wanted to help. She cried again, stayed the whole week, was sweeter than she'd ever been, affectionate, attentive, talking about the future in vague terms that made my heart race. Maybe we could travel together someday. Maybe I could meet her mother. Maybe. I lived on those maybes like they were oxygen. The wedding happened. She showed me photos on her phone afterward. Her brother and his new wife, extended family I didn't recognize, a small ceremony in a village I'd never visit. She looked happy in the pictures. Beautiful. I wasn't in any of them, of course. I hadn't been invited, didn't even know exactly when it was happening. But I'd made it possible. That counted for something. The pattern established itself after that. Every few weeks, a new crisis. Her mother needed surgery, 50 million dong. Her niece's school fees were due, and her brother couldn't pay 20 million dong. A cousin was opening a cafe and needed investors. Lynn swore it was a good opportunity. A loan that would be paid back with interest, 100 million dong. I asked to see a business plan, some documentation. She got upset. Asked if I didn't trust her. Said if I wanted paperwork like this was some cold Swedish business transaction instead of family helping family, maybe she'd misunderstood what we were to each other. I transferred the money. Never saw any paperwork. Never got updates on the cafe business. Never asked again. By July, I'd burned through most of my savings. The 400,000 kronor I'd brought from Sweden had shrunk to less than half. I'd spent over 200,000 kronor in less than a year, almost 500,000 dong on emergencies and investments, and helping Lynn's family navigate their endless catastrophes. My pension still covered my rent and basic expenses, but the cushion was disappearing. The safety net I'd spent 40 years building was full of holes. I knew I should stop. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to add up the numbers, look at the pattern, admit what was happening. But Lynn made me feel things I thought I'd never feel again. When we were together, really together, cooking dinner, walking through the night market, lying in bed with the fan spinning overhead, and the city noise filtering through the window, I felt like I'd cracked some code the other expats hadn't figured out. They were lonely. I had someone. The warning signs became impossible to ignore, though. She'd disappear for days sometimes. Her phone would go straight to voicemail. Then she'd reappear with elaborate explanations. Her mother was sick again. Her brother needed help with the new baby. She had to visit her cousin's cafe in Hanoi to check on the investment. Always family. Always emergencies. Always reasons. I couldn't quite verify, but couldn't quite dismiss either. I found receipts once. In her bag, when I was looking for my reading glasses, she borrowed receipts from hotels in Da Nang, restaurants I'd never been to, expensive ones. When I asked her about them, carefully, trying not to sound accusatory, she looked at me like I'd slapped her, said those were from a girl's trip months ago, before we were together. Why was I going through her things? Did I think she was cheating on me? I apologized. Felt like shit for even asking. She stayed angry for 2 days, wouldn't answer my calls, and I spent those 48 hours in quiet agony, terrified I'd ruined everything over stupid receipts that probably had some reasonable explanation I was too paranoid to see. When she came back, I gave her another 20 million dong for her mother's medicine. She stayed the whole week after. Everything was good again. The math got harder to ignore by September. I logged into my Swedish bank account one night while Lynn was sleeping next to me. Checked the savings account balance. 180,000 kronor left, less than half of what I'd started with 18 months ago. My pension covered the basics, but nothing extra. No emergency fund anymore. No cushion for medical expenses or unexpected costs or a flight back to Sweden if something went wrong. I sat there in the dark, the blue light of my laptop screen washing over Lynn's sleeping face, and tried to figure out where it had all gone. Tried to add up the legitimate expenses versus the questionable ones. But the lines were blurred. Was her mother's surgery legitimate? Probably. Was the cafe investment? Maybe. Were the random transfers when she needed money for rent or food or helping her family legitimate? Or was I being systematically drained by someone who saw me as nothing more than a foreign ATM? I couldn't answer that question, didn't want to, because answering it meant admitting I'd been a fool, meant admitting that this whole thing, the relationship, the affection, the future, we vaguely talked about might be a transaction I was too lonely and desperate to recognize. She stirred in her sleep, moved closer, her hand finding mine under the sheet. In that moment, I decided the math didn't matter. I'd rather be a fool with someone than smart and alone. I'd spent too many years being smart, being responsible, being the engineer who calculated every risk and chose the safe option. Look where that got me: a dead wife, kids who barely called, a life in Gothenburg that felt like dying slowly in a comfortable chair. At least here, with Lynn, I felt something. Even if it cost me everything. I closed the laptop, went back to bed, tried not to think about the 180,000 kronor and what would happen when it ran out. Tried not to think about my daughter's warnings when I told her I was moving to Vietnam. Tried not to think about the expat guys at the meetups who looked at me with a mix of pity and judgment when they saw me with Lynn. Tried not to think about the truth that was becoming clearer every day. I wasn't buying love. I was renting the illusion of it, and the lease was almost up. The breaking point came in November, almost exactly a year after I'd met Lynn. She showed up at my apartment one evening, didn't call first like she usually did, just appeared with that look on her face I'd learned to recognize something big was coming. We sat on the couch, she held my hands, looked at me with those eyes that had convinced me 1,000 times before that everything she said was true. Her family wanted to buy land in the Mekong Delta, build a house, secure their future. Her mother was getting older, needed family close, couldn't keep living in that rented room in the village. Her brother's new wife was pregnant. They needed space. This was the opportunity, she said. A piece of land near the river, good soil, room for a small house, and maybe some fruit trees. They could all live together, be safe, finally have something that belonged to them. And she wanted me to be part of it. Talked about us retiring there someday, away from the chaos of Ho Chi Minh City. Quiet mornings, fresh air, a simple life. She painted this picture so vividly, I could almost see it: me in a hammock under a mango tree, her bringing me tea, her mother's grandchildren playing in the yard. A family, a purpose, a reason to have come here. 200 million dong. She said it quietly, like she was afraid of the number. I did the conversion automatically, the engineer in me unable to stop calculating even when my heart was screaming at me to just say yes. 87,000 kronor, almost half of everything I had left. Almost half of the safety net I'd already shredded to nearly nothing. For the first time in a year, I said I needed to think about it, not no, just not yes. Just give me time to look at my finances, to see if I could make it work, to figure out how to do this responsibly. Her face changed, not dramatically. Just a subtle shift, a cooling, like someone had turned down the temperature in the room. She said she understood, said she'd give me space to think, kissed my cheek and left. Normal. Fine. Except it wasn't. That night, she didn't call. The next day, nothing. By the third day, I was checking my phone every 10 minutes like a teenager. Sent messages that went unread. Called and got voicemail. Told myself she was busy, giving me space like she'd said, respecting my need to think things through. By the end of the week, I was desperate. Went to Cafe Hung. She wasn't there. Asked the owner, the woman who'd always been friendly to me, where Lynn was. She looked at me strangely. Said Lynn had quit almost a month ago. No notice. Just stopped showing up. They'd hired someone new. A month ago. While she was still sleeping in my apartment, cooking in my kitchen, taking my money for her mother's latest medical emergency. She'd quit the cafe and never mentioned it. Where had she been going during the day? Who had she been with? I found the address she'd given me once, early on, for her apartment. District 4, she'd said. A small room she shared with her friend Mai. I took a grab across the river, found the building, climbed the narrow stairs to the 3rd floor. Knocked on the door. An old man answered. Looked confused when I asked about Lynn. Said he'd lived there for 15 years. Didn't know anyone by that name. Showed me his apartment, one room, a single bed. Clearly not a place. 2 young women were sharing. The unraveling happened fast after that, like pulling one thread and watching the whole thing come apart. I went home and really looked at my bank statements. Not the casual glances I'd been doing for months, the ones where I'd see the balance dropping and tell myself it was fine. It was all for good reasons. Really looked. Added up every transfer, every withdrawal, every time I'd handed her cash. Over 18 months, I'd given Lynn, or spent on her family's emergencies, approximately 650 million dong. I did the conversion 3 times because I couldn't believe it. 283,000 kronor. More than 2/3 of everything I'd saved from selling the Gothenburg flat. Gone. Evaporated. Converted into medical bills I never saw proof of, business investments I never got documentation for, family emergencies I never witnessed. The savings account that had held 400,000 kroner now showed 117,000, enough for maybe 2 years of emergency expenses if I was careful. Not enough to move home, not enough to buy property anywhere, not enough to handle a serious medical crisis or family emergency of my own. I was 75 years old with a monthly pension that covered my basic expenses in Vietnam, and almost nothing saved for the catastrophes that come with being old and human. I sat with that number for hours, tried to make it make sense, tried to justify it, but I'm an engineer. I understand structural failure. I know what happens when you remove too many load-bearing elements. The whole thing collapses. I went back to my phone, started searching. Her name on Facebook, the profile I'd never thought to look for because we were together. Why would I need to stalk her on social media? Found it immediately. Public profile. Dozens of photos I'd never seen. Her in Da Nang with another foreign man, older than me, white hair, tourist clothes. Tagged 2 months ago, right when she'd told me she was visiting her sick cousin in Hanoi. Her with a different man in Vung Tau. Another in Nha Trang. All older, all foreign, all looking at her the way I probably looked at her. Grateful, hopeful, pathetically happy. The comments were in Vietnamese. I copied them into Google Translate, knew the results would be rough but needed to see. Her friends joking. Laughing emojis. Someone wrote another ATM, someone else, sister, you're so talented. Another, living the dream lol. There were photos of shopping bags from expensive stores, designer purses I'd never seen her carry around me, hotel rooms overlooking beaches, meals at restaurants that cost more than my weekly grocery budget, all posted while she was crying to me about her mother's medicine, her niece's school fees, her brother's wedding costs. I should have felt angry. That would have been normal, healthy even. But I just felt hollow, empty, like someone had scooped out my insides and left the shell of an old man sitting in a humid apartment in a foreign country where he didn't speak the language or understand the culture, or have a single person he could call who wouldn't say I told you so. I couldn't tell Emma. She'd warned me about moving to Vietnam alone. Suggested I visit first, rent for a few months, see if I actually liked it before selling the flat. I'd been defensive, told her I was a grown man who didn't need advice from his daughter, that I'd survived 73 years just fine without her input. How could I call her now and admit she'd been right? That I'd blown through my savings on a woman who saw me as nothing more than a revenue stream. Couldn't tell the expat groups. They'd warned me too. The few older guys who'd pulled me aside at meetups when they saw me with Lynn. Said they'd seen this pattern before. Suggested I be careful. I'd ignored them. Thought I knew better. Thought my situation was different. Couldn't tell anyone back in Sweden. What would I even say? Hey, remember when I sold everything and moved to Vietnam for retirement? Well, I met a girl and gave her my life savings. She's gone now. I'm fine though. How's the weather? The isolation was complete. Self-inflicted. Deserved. I saw her 3 weeks later. Pure chance. I was walking through Ben Thon Market, buying vegetables because I was back to cooking for myself and hating every minute of it. Looked up, and there she was, across the produce section, laughing with another foreign man. Tall guy, maybe 60. Australian accent from what I could hear. His hand on her lower back, her leaning into him. The same body language she'd used with me. She saw me. Our eyes met. For a second, I thought she might acknowledge it. Say something. Acknowledge what we'd had, even if it was all a lie. But her face just went blank. Smooth, empty. She looked right through me like I was invisible. Turned back to the Australian guy. Kept laughing at whatever he was saying. I stood there holding a bag of green beans, 75 years old, watching the woman I'd given everything to pretend I didn't exist. That's when it really hit me. I hadn't lost my retirement to a scammer. I'd lost it to my own desperate need to matter to someone, to feel valuable, to feel like a man instead of an expired product sitting on a shelf waiting to be disposed of. Vietnam didn't do this to me. Lint didn't even do this to me, not really. I did it to myself. I saw every warning sign and ignored them because acknowledging the truth meant acknowledging something worse, that I was so lonely, so desperate for connection, so terrified of dying alone in a cold Swedish flat that I'd pay any price for the illusion of being loved. And the price was everything I'd worked 40 years to build. I'm still in Vietnam, not by choice, by necessity. My pension is 18,000 kroner a month. In Sweden, that might cover rent in a modest apartment outside the city, food, utilities, basic existence. No savings left for emergencies. No property to live in. No family willing to take in an old man who proved himself to be an embarrassing fool. Here, that pension covers a studio apartment, street food, utilities, the occasional beer. I live cheaper than I ever could back home. I don't have enough saved to move back and start over. Don't have enough to handle a medical emergency anywhere. But at least here, the health care is affordable when you're paying out of pocket. So I stay. Wake up every morning in this humid city. Drink coffee alone at a different cafe now. Can't go back to Cafe Shung. Can't face those memories. Watch the traffic. Try to learn Vietnamese on an app I downloaded. Keep to myself mostly. I see her sometimes. Across markets. Getting off motorbikes with different men. Once outside a nice hotel in District 1, dressed up laughing. She never sees me, or pretends not to. I don't know which is worse. Emma called last month. Asked how I was doing, if I needed anything. I lied. Said everything was fine. Said I was thinking about visiting next summer, spending time with the grandkids. She sounded relieved. Happy. I couldn't take that away from her by admitting the truth. The truth is, I'm 75 years old, living in a 400 square foot apartment in Saigon, eating street food to save money, afraid to answer calls from my daughter, because I don't want to lie but can't bear to tell the truth. I thought I was buying love. I was buying a fantasy. And the price was everything I'd worked 40 years to build. The expats talk about being scammed like it's something that happens to you, like you're a victim of circumstances beyond your control. But I knew. Deep down, I always knew. I just wanted the fantasy more than I wanted the truth. That's not being scammed. That's being willing to bankrupt yourself emotionally and financially, because the alternative, admitting you're alone and nobody's coming to save you, feels worse than the lie. I don't blame Lynn. She saw an opportunity and took it. I saw loneliness and tried to buy my way out of it. We both got exactly what we were looking for. She got money. I got the temporary illusion that someone gave a shit whether I lived or died. Fair trade, in a way. Honest, even. The lesson isn't, don't fall in love in a foreign country. It's not even, don't trust beautiful young women who pay attention to old men. The lesson is simpler and harder. You can't buy your way out of loneliness. You can't purchase meaning. You can't convert currency into human connection, no matter how good the exchange rate looks. I learned that lesson. Cost me 283,000 kroner and whatever was left of my dignity. But I learned it. Now, I just have to figure out how to live with it. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. I don't know why I'm writing this. Maybe to warn someone else. Maybe just to confess to someone, anyone, even strangers on the internet. Maybe because saying it out loud makes it real in a way it wasn't when it was just me and my bank statements in a dark apartment. If you're out there thinking about doing what I did, moving abroad, starting over, finding someone who makes you feel young again, I'm not going to tell you don't do it. I'm just going to tell you to be honest with yourself about what you're really buying. And make sure you can afford the real price, not just the one you see on the surface. Welcome back. That was Lars from Gothenburg, Sweden. 75 years old, living with the consequences of mistaking loneliness for love and transaction for connection. If his story hit home, if you've been there or know someone who has, drop a comment and share your experience. Hit that subscribe button if you want more real, unfiltered stories from expats navigating the complexities of life in Vietnam. And remember, the most expensive things we buy are the lies we tell ourselves. Thanks for watching Vietnamese Vixens. Until next time.